The wall's going to continue to go up. We'll be adding some steel. Holds the whole wall together. We're going to be connected to the rebar, widen some of the notches. I set one of the blocks hard up against the cornerstone. I just lay them tight up against each other. So this morning we're just moving a bit more block in, packers to keep them level with this concrete.
Close the door and leave the light on. The morning light should be coming soon. Kick off your shoes and leave the winter and the pain it brings to you. Lay your head upon my shoulder. Shut off your thoughts and clear your mind.
Well, yesterday we got the first foundation of block in. Today we're going to continue that, laying another course here. Good crow sound. Because our foundation steps up, we'll get our first course on this upper foundation level, and the wall's going to continue to go up. We'll be adding some steel through these voids. We're just going to scrape off some of this spilt cement. Seeing it was just poured yesterday, it comes off quite easily. We don't want this getting in the way of how our blocks lay out on the next course. After cleaning all the cement off our block, we've got to cut some rebar so we can insert them in the slots that we cut on our wet saw. The rebar is 6 meters long, so we need to cut up a bunch of 300mm small lengths. And of course, for safety reasons, I always wear eye and ear protection when I'm cutting steel. The rebar in this system is what holds the whole wall together. It's what adds all the strength that stops this wall from being pushed down by the hill. So these small pieces of rebar are going to tie the blocks into the concrete that we're going to pour behind these blocks. We use these rod ties. Just makes it quicker and easier to lock your rebar together instead of cutting up bits of wire. The idea here is to connect all our rebar together to create a unified system. So these small pieces of rebar are going to be connected to the rebar we set in our foundation that is sitting up vertically, and these will lay horizontally and connect between them. We use these small pieces of wire to tie them together. This wire isn't to really create any strength in the system as much as to just keep the rebar in the right place when we pour concrete over it. We pre-tie our small tabs of wire onto the short lengths of rebar, so then we can anchor them onto the vertical pieces of rebar. Once we have it set to the correct height, we tie off the horizontal piece of rebar onto our vertical piece coming out of our foundation. I just use my fingers to get the system started, and then I tighten it off with my pliers to make it really strong so the concrete won't move this when we pour it later. Here I've used a piece of scrap concrete to hold the piece of rebar in the right position. I'll remove this later when we pour the concrete in.
Let me be the one that keeps your soul from shattering. Just say the word and I'll be there.
Once we've got a couple of our horizontal pieces tied in, we're ready to put a big long horizontal piece for the back side of the wall. This is a good example of how I use my fingers to twist the wires around the rebar to get it started, and then finish it off with the pliers to make it really strong. With our longer piece of rebar secured on the back of the system, I can finish off these small 300mm pieces by resting them on top of the longer piece. This is forming a steel grid pattern through our concrete block. The last pieces of rebar we need to add to finish this off are the pieces that actually go through the block, that go through the cutouts we did on our wet saw. So first I measure to make sure I've got the right length, and then sometimes we have to do some adjustment on the block to get these to fit in. We're using our small grinder with a diamond cutting blade on it to just widen some of the notches in these blocks so the steel can fit through easily.
Let me be the one that keeps your soul from shattering. Just say the word and I'll be there. 'Cause I've got your back and I'll break the fall.
Here I'm cutting a small notch on the inside of our corner block so this rebar can fit behind it for extra strength. We want the rebar to be able to fit through the blocks with a nice gap around it for the concrete to set it in. With all the rebar tied in place, we're ready to continue on the block part of the wall. We start with our cornerstone, as we did before, because everything has to tie back into this cornerstone as it lines up with the existing deck. With our cornerstone set in the right place, we're ready to prepare all the other blocks we're going to be joining to it. So the first thing we're going to do is cut all the notches on our wet saw for all the blocks that we're going to need to complete this part of the wall. We're preparing these blocks with our notches the same way we did for the first course, which is to cut out 2 slots at the back of the block and 2 slots either side of the block for the rebar to go through. I always wear full eye and ear protection when I'm operating my wet saw. As with all cutting tools, we let the wet saw do its job by letting the blade get up to its proper speed and allowing it to cut at its own pace through the block without pushing it or forcing it. After cutting the slots in the block, a slight tap with the lump hammer will knock them out. We have one more notch to cut in the block that can't be done on the wet saw because it won't reach through the cutting system. So we do this with the small grinder.
And I change the course. Oh, I'll break the fall. Oh, I'll break the fall.
I set one of the blocks hard up against the cornerstone and check that everything's coming out plumb and level. Some of our hollow block get notched out in a slightly different configuration from our standard notches, so we cut those as we go. With our standard blocks all cut, washed and prepared, we're ready to complete this lower corner of the wall. Starting from our corner block, I just lay them tight up against each other and then double check that they're all level.
You cross the line, and I change the course. And I'll break the fall. I'll break the fall.
Yeah, so this morning we're just moving a bit more block in. Just try and do that a piece at a time because I've only got so much room here to keep it on these pallets. But I need a few more blocks to finish off this wall section, so we're going to try and empty one of the pallets outside on the street and then we'll get into some laying block. Part of managing this construction process is looking after my mind and body, and with that in mind, it's good to break up different tasks throughout the day. Moving all the block I need onto site in one session would be kind of brutal on my body and also logistically difficult because we don't have enough space. So it makes sense to move a bunch of blocks on site, get them fixed on the wall, and then move more blocks on site. By breaking this task up, you can actually enjoy it because it creates a variety in your day and keeps you motivated, which leads to a much better outcome in the quality of your project. We have to use a lot of care in transporting and stacking this split face hollow block as it's quite fragile and can chip easily. We don't want the split face to be scratched or damaged in any way. After moving enough block on site for the next part of our project, I take a break and enjoy these beautiful natural surroundings I get to work in. On this job site, there's a lovely paddock below me with these beautiful horses that I often just watch when I'm taking a break. Helps me refocus and get ready for the next part of our project.
Let me be the one that keeps your soul from shattering. Just say the word and I'll be there. 'Cause I've got your back and I'll break the fall. There's just no need to worry anymore.
After taking our morning rest, we're ready to process the rest of the blocks we're going to need to finish this wall today, to get the first course on, to get the concrete in it so tomorrow we can get the next level going. When you're working by yourself, you have to manage your time and process. So I set goals for what I want to achieve in one particular day, and today we want to have the entire bottom course of this wall laid in ready so we can continue our process. By cutting these blocks in batches, it also adds an efficiency to the process and an accuracy, so all the cutouts come out the same, which helps us speed up our process and have a uniformed and strong system in the end result.
Let me be the one that keeps your soul from shattering. Just say the word and I'll be there.
Here you can see how I have all the blocks stacked up vertically in a kind of production line, so I can finish off these cuts we have to do by hand on the small grinder.
You cross the line and I change the course, and I'll break the fall. I'll break the fall.
Now that we've finished processing all the blocks we're going to need to complete this part of the wall, we stack them conveniently right next to where we're going to be working. Before we get started laying out the block for this last bottom course, we're going to do some double checking with our string line levels to make sure the block ends up straight and plumb.
And the hollowness begins to permeate your soul in the pouring rain.
With our string line keeping all the blocks in a straight line, the next thing to check is the height that we've set on our corner, making sure that this height is dead level all the way through the system. To make this process manageable, we're breaking this wall up into two halves. I've set a block in the middle of the two halves, so we're sort of treating it like two separate walls. This makes it a bit easier to carry out the process. I can now start laying out the blocks tied up against the corner block system. As before, we're going to be using our packers to keep them level, as our foundation is roughly 10 mil below where the bottom of the block should be. Our standard is a 10 mil packer, but due to the variation of the concrete in the foundation, sometimes it'll be slightly more or slightly less than a 10 mil packer, so we have to adjust as we go. We just take our time until we get each block dead level, matching the block next to it. As we continue to lay each block next to each other, we double check its alignment with that center block that we set up earlier, breaking the wall into two halves.
Let me be the one that keeps your soul from shattering. Just say the word and I'll be there.
I just readjust the blocks back in line to keep them on track. We continue to lay blocks until we run into that center block that we set up earlier with our level. Once we get to this stage, we remove that temporary center block and tap in all the other blocks to make sure they're really tight to each other. This completes the process of laying out the first half of this span of wall. We just check back over our blocks to make sure they're all lined up and level.
You cross the line and I change the course. Oh, I'll break the fall.
So I've set this bottom course all the way along. It's all lined up, I've just wet it down. With the entire first course of these blocks laid out flat and plumb, we're ready to start pouring concrete in them to lock them into this foundation. We're using the same concrete formula we used on the earlier part of our wall when we laid our first row down on the corner, which was our normal 6-part sand and gravel to Portland cement, plus bondcrete, plus 1 shovel load of mortar to help the concrete spread underneath the 10mm gaps we've created with our packers. We're filling our hollow block about halfway up with this concrete mix before we start agitating it in to push it under those 10mm gaps we created with our packers. This is what's going to bond these blocks to the foundation. After agitating the concrete along the entire length of the wall from the first pour, we top it up with more concrete.
Now the sun don't shine when the dark clouds form and the hollowness begins to permeate your soul. In the pouring rain, wash your sins away.
This second batch of concrete should be pouring over the back of the notch we cut in the blocks. Using my trowel, I make sure that the concrete is pushed through the back gap that we'd cut with our wet saw, so the concrete spills over the back bottom edge, so we have a really good adhesion to the foundation.
'Cause I've got your back, and I'll break the fall. There's just no need to worry anymore.
I just continue through the entire length of the wall, working this concrete in thoroughly so we get all the air bubbles out and get a really good bond with the previously poured foundation concrete. This completes the process of setting our first course along the entire wall. Once this sets up, we can put the next course on. In the next episode, we go back to the ramp and start our natural stone wall. With the concrete all set and dry, we're going to remove our forms. So we're just going to use our crowbar and hammer to tap it out, removing the screws and the timbers from this form. We're going to start out filling this void with some leftover concrete from our demolition earlier. Our system for filling this void is to mix the black gravel we get started on the bottom ramp system. The plan is to pour some concrete in here as a base for the natural stone wall that we're going to build, with the stones over here incorporated into the block wall over here in the corner. This piece of timber here has a form for the stone to lay up against. Thanks for joining me this week in my YouTube channel. Check the link below, and while you're at it, hit the subscribe button or make a comment so I can help you with your future construction solutions. And don't forget to follow our channel for more ideas and how-to tips for home and garden projects.